It was an ordinary afternoon on a quiet suburban street, the kind where nothing ever seems to happen. The school bus had just pulled up, and kids were spilling out, their laughter filling the air. But then, out of nowhere, a little girl ran toward the bus driver, tears streaming down her face. Her tiny hands clutched her backpack, and her trembling voice carried a desperate urgency. The bus driver, a kind-hearted man named Mr. Ray, froze, sensing something was terribly wrong. "What's the matter, sweetie?" he asked gently, trying to calm her down, but her response stopped him in his tracks. With wide, tear-filled eyes, she managed to choke out 4 words, words that revealed a dark and heartbreaking truth. In that moment, the entire atmosphere shifted, and Mr. Ray knew he had to act fast. What could have driven this little girl to such panic? Stay tuned to find out. Mr. Ray knelt to the little girl's level, his heart racing as he tried to process her words. Her name was Emma, a quiet first grader who usually got off the bus with her older brother. But today, she was alone, and something was clearly wrong. "Where's your brother, Emma?" he asked softly, trying not to alarm her further. She shook her head, her small hands trembling as she clutched the straps of her backpack tighter. "He didn't come," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to go home. Please don't make me go home." The weight of her plea hit him hard. Mr. Ray glanced at the houses lining the street, searching for signs of someone who might help, but everything looked quiet and normal. Still, his gut told him there was more to the story. What could make a little girl so afraid of home? Mr. Ray's mind raced as he gently guided Emma onto the bus, deciding it was safer to keep her there until he understood more. The other kids had already gone home, leaving the bus eerily quiet. He handed her a tissue and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Emma, it's okay. You're safe with me. But can you tell me what's going on?" Emma hesitated, her little hands gripping the tissue as she wiped her tear-streaked face. I don't want to go back there," she murmured. "It's scary." "Scary?" Mr. Ray repeated, his concern deepening. "What do you mean, sweetie? Did something happen?" She nodded slowly, her eyes darting toward the bus window, as if she was afraid someone might see her. "I can't tell," she whispered, her voice shaky. "They said not to." The weight of those words hit Mr. Ray like a ton of bricks. "Who told you not to?" he asked gently, but Emma only shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. The silence between them grew heavier by the second, and he realized this was more serious than he could have imagined. Mr. Ray's instincts told him there was no time to waste. He tried again, his voice as gentle as he could make it. "Emma, I promise I'll help you. But I need to know what's happening. You're not alone, okay?" Emma glanced at him, her small frame trembling as if she was carrying a weight far too heavy for her age. Her lips quivered, and finally she whispered, "I can't go home. He's there." The words sent a chill through Mr. Ray. "Who's there, Emma? Is someone hurting you?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks again. But before she could say more, a car pulled up nearby, its headlights piercing through the growing twilight. Emma froze, her eyes widening in terror as she ducked down behind the seat. "Don't let them see me," she begged, her voice barely audible. Mr. Ray's heart pounded. He didn't know who was in the car or why Emma was so scared, but he could feel the tension in the air thickening. He stayed calm, peeking out the window, trying to assess the situation. The car idled for a moment before pulling away, leaving an uneasy silence behind. Emma let out a shaky breath, but her fear didn't fade. "They're watching," she whispered. Mr. Ray clenched the steering wheel, determined to protect her, no matter what came next. Mr. Ray's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Emma's fear wasn't ordinary, it was palpable, and whoever was in that car clearly played a part in it. He glanced down at her, still crouched behind the seat, her small hands gripping the fabric as if her life depended on it. "Emma," he said softly, "I need to call someone who can help. Will you trust me?" She hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. But just as Mr. Ray reached for his phone, the bus radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. It was a call from dispatch, sounding urgent. "Ray, we've got a parent here at the school looking for a missing child. A little girl. They say she didn't come home." Mr. Ray's stomach dropped. He glanced at Emma, who froze, her face going pale. "Who's looking for her?" he asked cautiously, his grip tightening on the radio. There was a pause before dispatch replied. "The father. He seems pretty upset." Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears, and she shook her head violently. "It's him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't let him take me." Mr. Ray's heart sank. The stakes were higher than he'd imagined. He had no idea what this man had done or why Emma was so terrified, but one thing was clear: he had to keep her safe. As the bus idled in the fading light, Mr. Ray realized he was no longer just a driver. He was Emma's lifeline, and time was running out. Mr. Ray's heart raced as he weighed his options. He couldn't let Emma go back to someone she was clearly terrified of, but he also knew he needed to act quickly. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the radio button and replied, "I'll head back to the school now. Keep him there until I arrive." Emma's eyes widened in panic. "No, please don't take me there. He'll find me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I won't let him near you," Mr. Ray reassured her. "But we need to figure out how to help you, okay?" As the bus turned toward the school, Mr. Ray thought through his next move. He called the police, explaining the situation as calmly as he could while driving. When he mentioned Emma's fear and the car that had followed the bus, the dispatcher assured him an officer would meet them at the school. When they arrived, the scene outside was tense. A man paced near the entrance, gesturing angrily at staff, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Emma clung to Mr. Ray's arm as they stepped off the bus, trembling but staying close. The man's eyes locked on her, and he started toward them. Before he could get too close, two officers intercepted him, their expressions firm. "Sir, we need to ask you some questions," one of them said. The man protested loudly, but the officers held their ground. Meanwhile, the other officer knelt in front of Emma. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she said softly. But then, just as the tension seemed to ease, Emma blurted out, "It's not him, it's her." The officers froze, confused. "Who, Emma?" She pointed past the man to a woman standing near the edge of the lot, watching silently. It was her stepmother. The woman's face turned pale as everyone's attention shifted to her. In that instant, she turned and bolted, but the officers were faster. As they cuffed her, Emma clung tightly to Mr. Ray. The truth unraveled quickly. Her stepmother had been the source of her fear, hiding her actions behind a facade of concern. The man, her father, had been desperate to find her and protect her all along. Emma finally let out a breath she'd been holding, and Mr. Ray felt a wave of relief. Though the night had been terrifying, justice had prevailed, and Emma's secret was no longer hers to bear alone. As the police led Emma's stepmother away, a sense of calm finally began to settle over the scene. Emma's father knelt down, tears in his eyes, and gently pulled her into a hug. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered. "I didn't know what was happening. I promise I'll never let anything like this happen again." Emma held onto him tightly, her small body shaking, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of relief in her eyes. Mr. Ray stood nearby, his heart heavy but grateful he had trusted his instincts. He watched as the officers reassured Emma and her father, promising to ensure they got the help they needed to move forward. As the bus pulled away from the school later that evening, Mr. Ray couldn't help but reflect on the little girl's courage. She had faced something far beyond her years, but now she had a chance to heal.